Will 2023 be the season we see Justin Simmons and Caden Sterns start as the safety duo for the Denver Broncos? What does the depth look like behind them? You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in and making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. To get the latest episode as soon as it is made available, make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. Joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. We continue our position preview, a state of the Denver Broncos after NFL free agency, leading up to the NFL draft. We've taken a look at every position on the defense, and we're finalizing that side of the ball here today with the safety position here. And Sayre, is it safe to ask the question, is it safe to say, are the Broncos going to unleash Justin Simmons and Caden Sterns as their starting safety duo here in 2023? Did they make any changes to the room? Can't wait to break it all down with you, my man.
I see what you did there, Cody. Is it safe to say? I like we're talking about the safety position, and of course, can't do that without talking about the dynamic duo, right? The Broncos have had over the last 3-4 seasons. Kareem Jackson, obviously the most notable departure from this group at this point, right? We've all seen the reports and the rumors. It kind of seems like both Kareem Jackson and the Broncos maybe have some mutual interest there in potentially reuniting. But as of right now, he remains a free agent as of the time we're recording this, which of course, Cody, as the formula goes for us recording our show, we'll get done talking about this. And then Kareem Jackson will sign a 1-year deal to come back to Denver. And, we'll have to talk about how funny it was. Yeah, that's just how it goes. We record the podcast, news happens. That seems to be the way that it is. So if Kareem Jackson does sign with the Denver Broncos as of before you've listened to this episode, just know that we manifested that here. But Cody, he is the most notable departure. And I think obviously you look at this room, it looks very similar to what we saw last season. And kind of you can almost project it in a very similar way as you could a year ago at this point before Kareem had re-signed as of last season.
Well, and I think the question that we're going to ask is, is it good? Should the Broncos at this point bring Kareem back? We're building up to the NFL draft, right? It's just a couple of weeks away here. And I know Broncos Country is wondering, look, Kareem, happy birthday to him. He just celebrated another birthday in the last 24 hours. So mile high salute to him. There hasn't really been any changes to this room, as you indicated, right? The one thing is initially we thought that there were going to be some changes. Everything would look different because PJ Locke was a restricted free agent. They decided not to tender him. And we were all thinking okay, well, they didn't tender him. That means he's going to hit free agency. Well, out of nowhere, they re-signed PJ Locke, who they view as one of their key special teams guys, led the Broncos in special teams tackles last season with 12. And he's got a goal this upcoming season to get at least 15 or 16 there. Aside from that, it is Justin Simmons as the guy who's been the key name in that room. Yeah, the uncertainty of whether or not they're going to bring back Kareem Jackson still looms at this point because we've seen the last 2 seasons. It's been a late wave 3, wave 4, right before the NFL draft move in terms of bringing him back into the fold, and he wants to play 2 more years. We know that there is some mutual interest from the Broncos, but the question is it now time to let Justin Simmons and Caden Sterns take the reins here on the back end of that safety group? And I think that with the investment that George Paton made in a guy like Sterns, 110%, Sayre, you have to go with Caden Sterns. You have to see what he's got because in his sample size last year, man, it was impressive. Even though he played 5 games, had the reconstructive hip surgery, he had 2 interceptions in, that game against the Indianapolis Colts. I believe he allowed a passer rating in the first 5 weeks of the NFL season when quarterbacks looked his way of 8.9. That's very low. If you weren't keeping score or you didn't know what it was out there, that's extremely low there. And he was just in good position coming up against the run, being a back-end ball hawk. I think and that's where Justin Simmons and Caden Sterns thrive. Both of them aren't just, okay, hey, you're going to play the middle of the field. Both these guys can come up and play against the run in the box. They can play, in the back end against the pass. To me, you have two guys who can do the same exact thing, and this defense is designed to where it's not just, okay, you specialize against this, I specialize in that. It's, hey, it's multifaceted, it's versatile. I'm glad that they brought PJ Locke back into the fold because he can also play that same exact role on the back end as he has. We've seen in the preseason him and Caden Sterns have started together as those two back ends on the two high safety look.
And I like that idea. I think that a lot of times you look over a roster and you almost, it's kind of like when you listen to a really good song, a lot of times, Cody, you kind of get like, it becomes almost white noise at a certain point. Like at first you're like, oh, wow, that's a really great song. And you listen to it a couple, dozen, 100 times or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden you're just like, that song is what it is. That's kind of how it feels like with the Broncos safety depth a little bit. I know that analogy is kind of a stretch, but obviously like Justin Simmons has been so good for so long that you almost just like out of sight, out of mind sort of thing. And the other guys, it kind of feels like with Caden Sterns and with PJ Locke and now, these other guys that we're going to talk about kind of almost feels like, hey, we've been listening to that song a few times, right? We've been talking about this similar situation for a couple of years in a row now. So I think the Broncos are in good shape if they do decide to go with Justin Simmons and Caden Sterns as their top two safeties this season. I think you can put some faith behind Sterns despite the injuries, despite the fact that he hasn't played a ton. I think they were moving that direction last season, Cody. We saw he played a significant percentage of the snaps early on in the year, and I think he was trending towards being that full-time starter back there, with Kareem maybe sliding into a different spot. I don't know that for a fact. It just seems to be that's where the breadcrumbs were leading us to believe. So we'll see what happens here as we progress forward and start talking about the depth at this position, right? We're getting towards the NFL draft. Broncos only have 5 picks. Does look like they may be considering some safety help early on.
It's going to be interesting to see, and obviously this week, Broncos Country, we do have our third round Thursday coming up, so if you view the Broncos as maybe taking a safety in round number 3, stay tuned for the prompt later on this week on Twitter, at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos, so you can submit your third round Thursday mock draft. We'll go through and we'll pick the best ones as well. We want to throw that out to you as well as we continue our State of the Broncos at the free agency leading up to the NFL draft. What does the safety depth look like, and should the Broncos maybe look at adding a vet, or would they benefit from adding a young guy in the NFL draft? You'll get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbooks. Grand slams, no-hitters, and double plays are back, and there is no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. Don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.
Do the Denver Broncos have their safety depth on lock, right, Cody? As we talk about the starters, Justin Simmons, presumably at this point, Caden Sterns, kind of based on what we've seen the last couple years. What is the depth at this position? We kind of talked about this with other spots on the defense. Is it really a depth chart, or is it just a chart? Do the Broncos actually have depth in these spots? I'm kind of excited to talk about some of these players because I like what the Broncos have done. The last couple of draft classes, they've really emphasized on day 3 of the draft. They've really been emphasizing that safety position. You also look at the development of a guy like PJ Locke, like we mentioned in the first segment, somebody who took a big step of growth, I think, last year. We really saw. Remember when it was, I believe it was Kareem Jackson was absent at OTAs. It was PJ Locke that stepped in as the, number 2 next to Justin Simmons, not Caden Sterns. And everyone was like, well, what's going on with Caden Sterns? And then he comes out early in the year and has all this production. PJ Locke, by the way, also had a couple big plays early in the year. Cody, let's talk about the depth, though. Right now, no Kareem Jackson. Obviously, we've talked about the top 3 guys. What have you been noticing, I guess, or hearing? Delarrin Turner-Yell. He's the one guy, Back to the Future. He's the one guy there at that position group that I think, when he was drafted, people are kind of touting him as maybe the next Kareem Jackson or maybe a similar type of role in that defense. What did the Broncos see from him, like from him? What did Christian Parker see from him, like from him in his rookie season to give people confidence that he can step in to a bigger role in year 2?
Yeah, this is a great question. And look, we didn't see much of him in his rookie season on the defensive side of the ball, hardly at all. Got to play a lot in the preseason, which I think is good. He'll play a ton more in this upcoming preseason slate, which we will get in August, where the Broncos are set to play 3 games of action where the starters are expected to play. That'll be nice to see a little bit for everybody. It's like, oh, the starters should play in the preseason. Guess what? You got your wish. Sean Payton believes the same exact thing. But it's also for me, you and I, we've talked about it so much on the show. We love the preseason because we get to evaluate these young guys who are fighting and clawing for a roster spot. To me, I think that's one of the more exciting parts about building a roster outside of your key guys, which everybody's so fixated on. We'll talk about that, obviously, as we get a little bit closer. Training camp still is a little bit of ways away here. But as it stands now, like from what I know, Delarrin Turner-Yell is a guy that they really expect to maybe take the next step forward this upcoming season, right? What does that look like? Well, last year, he did have a couple of big plays on special teams. He will play a prominent role on the special teams side of the ball, but he will compete for a chance to maybe have some type of role in the defense. Look, it's a new defensive coordinator now under Vance Joseph. He will have some familiarity in terms of the position coach at DBs with Christian Parker, as you alluded to there. But the main thing is, can he be a little bit more consistent, right? And I think maybe some areas we see him as a thumper. There were some times in the preseason last year, kind of got misaligned in some coverage there, but that's first NFL action, being on the field there. So there were some things that stood out to him, to me about him. I thought he came up and tackled relatively well for the most part in the latter half of those preseason games. But to me, can he crack the defensive rotation, right? Even if it's not like a big role, if it's in a certain package where maybe he's what they call a joker or a robber or something like that, maybe they can find a way to get him on the field. I do think you have to see what he can do here. Look, you invest in Caden Sterns. He beat out, obviously, a guy in Jamar Johnson who was on the roster last year. And you look at Delarrin Turner-Yell, he beat out Jamar Johnson as well. And that's why Jamar Johnson isn't on the Broncos anymore from a depth perspective. But I know internally in the building, they want to see him take the next step forward. And that's being more consistent on special teams and maybe evolving into one of the better special teams guys for the Broncos and becoming a core 4 guy. I think that's an emphasis. That's a goal that they have for him, considering that the reality, the projection right now is Justin Simmons, Caden Sterns, PJ Locke, obviously ahead of him with his experience, but can Trey, as most coaches call him, can he make some hay here in OTAs, in minicamp, and then once you get into training camp, to me, that is that. They also added another guy late last offseason in Devon Key, who's spent some time in the NFL, not much experience as a starter. To me, though, Sayre, I don't feel like that is enough. I feel like they should add another guy, another veteran option. And look, this is why I think right now, as we are recording this, that's why it makes sense for Kareem Jackson to come back. But I think we have to have the conversation here, Sayre. If Kareem comes back to Denver, does he start or does he take a different kind of role? How might that impact a guy like Delarrin Turner-Yell, right, if you do bring him back? How does it impact a guy like PJ Locke, who has earned the right to be in the defensive rotation while still maintaining his key elements as a special teams guy? Would Kareem Jackson at this point in his career play special teams? I don't know, but I think you look at it from this standpoint. If Justin and Caden are going to be the main 2 guys, those are the guys that are not going to be playing on special teams. The guys who are backups will be playing a lot on that. And I just don't know if Kareem at this point, can you ask him to do that?
That's the tough question, isn't it, right now, Cody? Because maybe that's why some of these guys haven't signed yet. Because are they really gonna go after a role like this where they're scratching and clawing for not just playing time, but like they're actively getting in the way potentially of your plans to let the future move forward, right? So on the one hand, it's like, well, we love Kareem Jackson. He's been really good for the Denver Broncos, and it was great to get him when they did in 2019. And he's a really cool story as a former first-round corner, turned safety, really carved out a great role for himself, really extended his NFL career in all likelihood doing that. And then there's this other aspect of it that's like, no, we want to see the future kind of moving forward for these guys. And I agree with you. I think a veteran would really raise the floor of the room. It's just a matter of how can you make it work out logistically. Like, not only is Kareem Jackson an interesting option, but remember back when they signed Kareem Jackson, there was also rumors when, because Fangio came aboard, talking about all these different former Bears players that were hitting free agency. Remember, Adrian Amos was also a free agent at the time connected to the Broncos. He ended up signing with the Green Bay Packers, where, of course, Christian Parker was his position coach there in Green Bay. So kind of an interesting connection out there, a couple of connections. If you want to talk about Kareem Jackson, Adrian Amos, plenty of other guys I'm sure that are connected to the other Denver Broncos, coaches on the defensive side, Vance Joseph. There's so many options out there to get a veteran to raise the floor of the room. It's now just a matter of, hey, is the price going to be right? And number two, do you really want to maybe stunt the growth of what you kind of had in mind as, planning for the future, really believing in Caden Sterns, really believing in PJ Locke, maybe even Delarrin Turner-Yell as well. So I think they should add at the position. The question is, what kind of guy are you going to get out there that's going to be really in that right role? Like you said, playing special teams, being willing to let these young guys take the majority of the snaps.
That is a great question to ask, especially as they go forward. And look, I know that leadership and having a guy in that position room who has a voice is huge. Denver had two really great guys with that. And I'm talking Justin, I'm talking Kareem. Those two guys were the glue of the locker room, essentially, last year. Even on the offense and defensive side of the ball, guys look to Justin and Kareem. And obviously for Justin's status as a captain, it makes a lot of sense as to why Kareem is viewed as a captain in a sense in many ways. For me, I think that you have to be very forward-thinking, right? Like, yes, we value Kareem Jackson. We love what he's been able to do for us. We love the impact he has in the locker room. But if we're going to evaluate and get our best players in position, especially players like Caden Sterns, who, eventually the clock on his contract is going to run out, and you have to decide whether or not you feel confident that he can be a guy that can play next to Justin Simmons for the next 5 to 6 years. To me, that's what you have to evaluate. That's what you have to see. And obviously, the depth is important. They have a key guy in PJ Locke, but they may have to look at other options like Delarrin Turner-Yell. Can he do enough to make sure that he stays on the roster, right? I think that's a huge thing to be able to ask, and that's a fair question to ask at this point as we get ready for training camp and all the offseason craziness that is about to start for the Broncos and for the rest of the NFL ahead of next season. To me, you always have to have an eye on the future as well, right? So maybe adding to that room in the draft, we still factor in there's going to be room for undrafted rookie free agents. Could there be an undrafted rookie free agent safety that really catches the eyes and the attention of this coaching staff? What does Sean Payton want? Like, to me, that's the most important thing. I don't have the answer to, but what does Sean Payton want for the safety position on his football team? To me, that is a question that hopefully we can ask here very soon whenever we get a chance to speak with Sean Payton once again and win the media. But then again, that's the offseason program. Things are going to ramp up here for this Broncos football team. And Broncos country, we want to ask you, are you comfortable with the Broncos' depth at safety right now? Do you believe that they should add a guy in free agency or add a guy in the NFL draft, undrafted rookie free agent? Make sure you comment that down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you want to tweet us, if you're listening on your favorite audio podcasting platform, at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. We appreciate you so much, Broncos country, for all the interaction. But one thing we're going to ask and answer as well, we're going to take it to court. Is the Broncos safety room better right now than it was last year on paper at this point last season? That's something you'll get on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at Ultimate Football GM. You've heard me talk about this mobile game app, and if you've ever thought you'd make a good GM, you can give it a try with an app that is free and you can access it anywhere you essentially want to. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every strategic aspect of your team as you play through seasons, and you lead your team to glory, trying to build a historic dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, managing all the finances, including negotiating player salaries and terms. You get to navigate your franchise through free agency, the draft, injuries, player personnel issues, and all the ups and downs of a season. All of this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free. It's playable offline where you can play on the go as you want and when you want to. Locked On Broncos listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. So make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. As we take the case to court, is the Denver Broncos safety room better in 2023? Sayre and I, we're going to share our thoughts and our opinions and analysis on this subject matter here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. I just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast on YouTube every single day. You can watch us. Make sure you like, you comment on the video, and you also interact with other members in Broncos Country to help grow the show to even more members of Broncos Country. We appreciate you so much. Where you can listen every single day on your favorite audio podcasting platform. Sayre, my friend, I'm going to open it up to you. We're going to open up the floor here on the final portion of today's episode of the show. When it comes to the Broncos safety room going into 2023, how do you feel about it? Is it better right now going into the season than they were last year going into the offseason, preparing for minicamp, OTAs? I'm curious for your thoughts.
Cody, I've got my verdict, and I am going to say they are better. And I know that may seem like a stretch, and just so everyone knows, if you're listening to just this position group, it's not like we've said, yes, every position group is better at this point. I think there's a lot of projecting that goes into this, isn't there, with Kareem Jackson potentially maybe coming back, maybe not. I like that the team is taking a step forward with Caden Sterns, getting a little younger at the position. We kind of thought that would happen last year, and it didn't happen. Why? Because of injuries. And that is, of course, the story with Caden Sterns, why he lasted to the 5th round of the 2021 NFL draft, and kind of why we haven't maybe seen this progression already happen. I like this position group specifically, and I do think it's better because the young guys have progressed almost as you expect them to, right? Even though the sample size on Caden Sterns was smaller last year, we did see him take that step forward that we were hoping for. Same with PJ Locke, and I think his development kind of came out of left field. It was almost like you expected him to be a special teams only guy, and then he developed into, PJ Locke, just by the way, he played nickel all, his time at Texas, and now he's playing safety in the NFL, and now he's kind of showing he can do both things really well, taking that step forward. I think this position group is better because those young guys have progressed to the point that right now we're able to have this conversation of whether or not should the Broncos even bring back Kareem Jackson? Should they even sign a veteran at the position? I think just for comfortability's sake, maybe you'd like to see that. But I'm going to say, Cody, I think that the position group is better because of the way those young guys have taken their steps forward.
I'm agreeing with you on this one. And the reason why is, while I think losing a guy like Kareem Jackson is big, not only from the play standpoint, you can make the argument he did struggle at times in certain coverage aspects when teams would attack with a corner route with the number 2 guy or the number 3 guy. Kareem did struggle in some of those areas, but obviously very consistent against the run, stayed healthy this past season. He's always been reliable and durable, which I think is something that, absolutely you should applaud. To me, the Broncos safety room is in a better place here in 2023 if Justin Simmons, if Caden Sterns, if these guys remain healthy. Sayre, I believe that these two players can really maximize the Broncos' defensive production on the back end, right? Because you're going to make it so much easier. You got Patrick Surtain on one side. You got a guy in Damari Mathis who has shown a lot of promise, and we're hoping he can continue to take the next step. Other positions we've reviewed. Can Baron Browning and Randy Gregory get after opposing quarterbacks? I'm confident with Justin and with Caden on the back end, two very, very smart guys who have proven so far that they are capable of being ball hawks. They are the main catalyst when it comes to taking the football away from opposing offenses, something that Denver hadn't done quite enough of over the past couple seasons. But when you look at who did it, it's those guys coming away with interceptions, forced fumbles, fumble recoveries. And I think that on the back end, those two guys are in a good position to elevate the rest of the Broncos defense, to keep them competing at a very high level. It's going to be hard to try to attack them because both guys are effective coming up against the run. Both guys are effective in pass coverage, dropping down, playing robber, playing the middle of the field, and being able to lock up when necessary. To me, I'm very intrigued to see how Vance Joseph and Sean Payton will collaborate to utilize these guys' skill sets on the defensive side of the ball to maximize output. I do believe that they are better, and I think in the same time, you can add another guy to that mix, whether it be, a guy who's been in the league for a couple of years, maybe not like a big-time name, somebody who, doesn't expect to start but can step up and step in if necessary. You mentioned PJ Locke. He's got that spot on Locke, pun intended, at this point in time. But then you can add another guy behind Delarrin Turner-Yell, and you have two young guys who can continue to battle and compete for a special team spot, because that's where a majority of the rosters are made up, right? You have your 11 starters on offense, your 11 on defense, but where you really make your hay and you get an opportunity to prove yourself, as has been the case with so many guys that we now see as prominent starters, special teams is the way going forward. Can DTUI and can another guy compete to showcase that, to get more playing time? To me, I think that they can. I think that should be an emphasis, especially with Ben Katwika, the new special teams coordinator, Mike Westhoff as well. To me, I am in agreement. I do believe that the Broncos safety room is in a better position. If those guys do in fact remain healthy, they are in good hands. In Broncos country, Sayre and I, we want to know what you think. Are the Broncos in a better position right now than they were last year? Chime in down below if you're watching on YouTube in the YouTube comments, or you could tweet us on Twitter with your answer at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos, if you're listening on your favorite audio podcasting platform. Broncos country, we appreciate you so much for tuning in and rocking with us, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, so you never miss out on an episode as soon as it's made available. We appreciate you so much. Tomorrow's episode of the show, we're continuing on our State of the Broncos. Now we're focusing on the offensive side of the ball. Did the Denver Broncos get better at the quarterback position, whether it be with Russell Wilson, whether it be behind him? You get that on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos.